Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the TARGETjobs National Pupillage Fair. I'm Mark Keith. I'm a lead designer at BPP University Law School. So I'm in charge of the design of our version of bar training. So thank you very much for coming to this presentation. Unfortunately, I can't see you. I did a presentation last year at this event in Lincoln's Inn, and it was really fabulous to see everyone there. Unfortunately, in the times that we live in, that's not possible this year, but there is the ability to ask me any questions. So if you type in any questions, they'll appear on my screen and I'll be able to answer them perhaps during the presentation or at the end. But just as soon as anything occurs to you, any questions that you want to ask, please just type away and I'll get to them as and when it's appropriate. So what is this presentation about? Well, as the title suggests, choosing the right bar course for you. And I thought I'd start by just explaining a little bit about what essentially the bar courses have been through over the past couple of years. So many of you on this presentation in the audience may very well know about the Bar Professional Training course, the BPTC. That's the course, or was the course, that existed from around 2010 until September this year. And whilst it continues for part-time students, just whilst we complete their programs, the BPTC is now no longer a program that is offered to new entrants. Why is that? Well, essentially, the Bar Standards Board has been through a quite extensive consultation process about bar training and thinking about how they can make bar training fit for the 21st century and fit for the 2020s. And as a result of that consultation, they produced an authorization framework where all bar providers had to say or produce courses that were affordable, accessible, flexible, but still of high standards. And so many of the existing BPTC providers, indeed all of them, made applications for authorization, and all of them were granted. And there was a new entrant as well, and potentially there might be new entrants in future. Now, as a consequence of that, the BPTC has disappeared and it's been replaced by a number of different courses. So, for example, you've got BPP's barrister training course, and there's another provider, another university, they offer a barristers, plural, training course. There's a bar course, there's a bar vocational studies, there's a bar professional course. So there's different names now for bar training. And that might seem quite confusing. But the rationale from the Bar Standards Board was that what they wanted to do was create a market for students where different universities were offering different pathways to pupillage, essentially, and to a career as a barrister. So as a consequence, they didn't want all of the universities to name their course the same thing because they're all different. Now, whilst that diversity might seem a little bit strange and a bit confusing, it is a really important thing for you as potential students of bar training, because what it's allowed each of the universities that provide bar training to do is create different versions of the course. And that's a really important thing, because the old BPTC was very one size fitted all. You started in September, you finished in June, you did the core, then you did the options. And pretty much, if I'm honest, most of us were pretty similar in what we offered. What the Bar Standards Board has allowed the universities to do is to create different courses that ultimately get you to the same place, but they allow you a choice as to how you get there. And that's a really important thing for you as students, to have that ability to choose how you get to your endpoint, which is ultimately, hopefully, being a practicing barrister. So whilst Previously, there was, a choice of provider, but it was pretty much the same no matter where you really went. And a lot of the time, it was a case of whether or not you wanted to be regionally based or based in London. In future, there is going to be a choice, or there is a choice even from this September. And so what that means and what this presentation is aimed to do is to give you key kind of considerations that you need to think about when it comes to choosing a place to do your bar training. Now, obviously, I work at BPP, and obviously, I'm biased because I designed our course. But what I'm trying to do in this presentation is be quite neutral about it, okay, and give you kind of like the tools that you can go to. You can go and ask BPP, you can go and ask ICA, you can go and ask ULaw, City, etc. Questions at this fair to help you choose which provider you want to go to. You might want to come to us, and that's fine. If we're the right provider for you, that's fine. But if another university is a better fit for you, that's what you've got to do. That's the best thing for you to do, because you're ultimately buying a course that you want to be successful in. So essentially, there's three main things that you need to consider when you are deciding which university you would like to study your bar training, your bar course at. So the first thing to consider, and I'll just set these out and then I'll unpack them a little bit more in a bit more detail in a moment, is the financial side of things. We all not acknowledge, all my colleagues at other universities, we acknowledge that essentially the bar training is an expensive course. And there is a reason for that, and that's basically because there's a large amount of skills training within the bar courses across the country, and that means that essentially the courses are more expensive than, say, an undergraduate law degree or indeed any other degree. So there's things like, the course fees. Do you need master's funding? What about scholarships? And what do you get within your core fees? So such as, practitioners' texts. The key thing is it's not really just about the headline price. That's yes, obviously on all the websites, there's how much the course costs, and that's a really important factor. Of course it is, but it's what you get for your money. What value for money are you getting? And we'll talk about that in a moment. The second thing you need to consider is employability. Fundamentally, you're wanting to do a bar course because you want to be a barrister. And in order to be a practicing barrister, you need to do pupillage. So the key question that you need to think about is how and what support will I get in order to get that pupillage. And that's one of the reasons why you're here. You're going to be going off after this call and speaking to chambers that are offering pupillage. So that's what you want, and what you need to get from your university is help and assistance to do that. And then the final thing is, or final consideration, is course design. So as I said earlier, what the BSB has allowed with its future bar training consultation program and its new authorization framework is diversity in course structure. So you might find that one university is a better fit for you than another university, but you need to find out what essentially the offering is by way of course structure and way of course design from that university. So dealing firstly with the financial aspects then. So course fees. So most of the universities have made an announcement as to their course fees for September 2021. So you can go on their websites and find their fee structure. One or two of them are yet to announce, and one or two of them still have prices on their website for 2020, for September start 2020. But the information is out there, so you can go and have a look at that. Again, what we have now, because of this diversity, is you tend to have different courses being offered. So, for example, quite a number of universities offer the bar course as in an academic wrapper as a postgraduate diploma. or alternatively, it could be offered as an LLM with additional modules to make up that enhanced master's qualification. Now, those courses tend to be charged at different course fees. So part of what you need to decide is what sort of qualification do you want to go for, because that affects the costs. Do you essentially want the core, what you need to do in order to pass the bar, in order to be called to the bar, or do you want something more than that? And that's where you kind of have a difference sometimes between the postgraduate diploma and the LLM. So talking about the LLM, so part of the BSB's remit for universities to run bar training was affordability and accessibility. So most of the universities offer their bar course as a master's program, as an LLM. Now, what that enables you to do is to access student loans funding for that, which is currently, I believe, £11,222. Okay, so what you have to ask is, if you want to access student loans funding, and therefore will be doing an LLM, is you need to ask that provider whether or not they offer that as one of their programs, because at least one doesn't offer an LLM, and if you need that LLM funding in order to access bar training, then essentially you need to make sure that that is an offering that is available by that university. Another thing to think about, and it's a combination of the course fees and the masters, is where you want to do your bar training. And that's basically because London, as a Manchester lad, is expensive. It's more expensive than the regions, although I don't particularly like that phrase. Okay, so it tends to be the out of London cities where bar training is based. They do tend to be cheaper, and as that's the simple fact that London is more expensive. So it's more expensive for the universities to deliver their training within London. Now, for some people, they are attracted by going to London. They might want to practice down there. They might want to be close to the inns. So that's for some people is a reason to potentially pay a little bit more for their bar training. But I can speak as someone who's taught a number of universities on the bar course in different cities, but there is advantages to being in the regions as well, particularly if you're interested in practicing on that particular circuit. It gives you an opportunity to make links with local practitioners and local chambers. It is, of course, cheaper to live there, and the bar course is cheaper. And as well, sometimes, and most of the time, it tends to be smaller cohorts than are in London. So that's something to think about. It's kind of like within the course fees, because that's something that people need to think about. Is London, with its slight more expense, somewhere where you want to go? And for a lot of people, it is. Right on the doorsteps of the inns. Whether I like it or not, it's the centre of the legal market in England and Wales. But there are places like Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, Newcastle, Bristol, Nottingham, and of course Cardiff, in Wales, that have thriving legal communities as well. So it's a matter of personal choice. The next thing to think about is scholarships. So obviously the inns, and many of you will be considering at the moment which inn to join, and many of you will have already made applications for inn scholarships at the beginning of this month. But in addition to that, most of the universities offer a scholarship program for their bar course. Now, don't presume that that is the case. Do ask whether or not basically they do offer a scholarship program, because it's additional funds for you to access bar training. And what I think you need to be asking is what those scholarships are, how much they are, and essentially, if you get a scholarship from your inn, probably next year, if you're planning on coming to do bar training next year, will the provider still award you a scholarship or not? Because some of the providers, if you get an in scholarship, they don't offer you the same money that they would have done if you hadn't. So that's an important thing to ask. What's the scholarship program that they offer? What type of scholarships are available? How much are the scholarships, and whether or not, if you got an in scholarship, would they take away the award of the money for the scholarship? The final thing in this financial section is part of this kind of value for money aspect. So what are you getting for your fees? And a key thing is practitioner's text. So I've got a practitioner text here. So there's Blackstone's, that's one. There's volume 1 of the White Book and volume 2 of the White Book. Okay, so does your university, does your bar course include those practitioner texts within your course fees? Or if you want hard copies of them, is there an additional fee for you to pay? I think most of us will offer you electronic copies, so essentially via Lexis or Westlaw. But are you getting hard copies of them or not? If you are getting hard copies, do you still get electronic copies, or do you get both? Okay, because different people work in different ways. Although the White Book, you can take that into one of the civil exams. So you might very well find that a lot of providers will give you a hard copy of the White Book, but what about Blackstone's as well? Okay, so Blackstone's being the criminal set text. Important thing, they're expensive books, but they're the books that you will use in practice. And many of you will have been on mini pupillages where you'll have seen someone take one of these out of their roller trolley, see a judge using it on the bench. Are they included in your fees or not? So that's the financial aspect of things. The second thing and second consideration is employability. So it's important, really, as I said before, why you're doing the bar course is because you want pupillage at the end of it in order to then be a tenant and a barrister thereafter. So first thing is, what is the university's careers advice like? Okay, what are they? Have they got dedicated careers advice? What is that careers advice that they are offering? It's an important thing to consider, because what you want is support, help, and assistance with drafting those pupillage applications in the first place. So your gateway applications or CVs, covering letters for mini pupillages, things like that. What about assistance if you get an interview for pupillage? What is offered there? Is it a case of, just a quick chat? Is it a mock interview where potentially members of the faculty, the practicing barristers who are part of the teaching team, will they form a panel? Will they basically give you a mock interview? So these are things that you need to be asking about, what the career provision is for the students when you get there, because you want as much career support as possible. And if you're going for an interview, you want help to basically make sure that you're at the top of your game to give you the best chance of getting that pupillage. Second thing in employability is pro bono. And I imagine many people on this this presentation have undertaken some pro bono potentially as part of their undergraduate law degrees. It's a really important thing to give back, I think, to people who can't access legal services. I for one, I work with our pro bono unit, and I help out with any clients that essentially have a personal injury related issues. I do that with students, so I supervise them, and it's really kind of rewarding to be part of that. Keeps my skills set up. But what you need to think about is, how are the pro bono opportunities that are offered by that university, how will they help you get pupillage? What will they look like on the CV? So ask about what pro bono opportunities are available at any particular university, because you want to be thinking about how they can enhance your CV, your application form, in order to get pupillage. And then the final consideration in employability is pupillage statistics. It's to think about how many of the people at that particular university have been successful in the ultimate goal of getting pupillage. And what you will find is that a lot of the universities, they will have their own statistics that they'll put on their website that they'll talk about. And yeah, absolutely, those are fine, and they are to be believed. But there is actually a golden source of information. In fact, it contains information that is much wider than just pupillage stats. It's got things like the number of outstandings, very competency students got, and that's the BSB's BPTC key statistics documents. So the one for 2020 has recently been published, and it contains stats up until about 2018 in the main. So it's called the BPTC because obviously we just changed over in September to the new bar courses, so it is basically retrospective, so it's looking back. But in that document, what you have is the regulator, the BSB, collates and collects the data from former students when they register their pupillage. So essentially, it's the gold standard. You can look at that page, and it's a nice graph, and you can see of the former providers of the BPTC, which are all providers of the new bar course, how their students fared when it came to getting pupillage. You can make a like-for-like comparison on that. So it's a really, really interesting document, lots of nice colour graphs. Some of it's a little bit impenetrable, but it does give you a good idea about how that particular university was performing with the BPTC. The final consideration is course design. So as I said earlier, what the BSB has done with its Future Bar Training Consultation is allowed the universities to go back to first principles and to think about how we as universities want to deliver bar training to maximize our students' teaching and learning opportunities, the assessment opportunities, and ultimately the ability to prepare students for practice. So what that has led to is that it's led to a very diverse group of courses or programs that you can potentially choose to study. So a number of providers have gone with online part one programs. So essentially you do civil and crime, and that's very much online. You don't have any face-to-face teaching within that part one program. And it is contextualized to some degree in that you watch recordings of people doing advocacy applications, or there's little tasks for you to do, but there's no face-to-face learning in that. And that's one way of learning. Other providers have offered part one, but it's offered as a face-to-face course, or would be face-to-face once we're out of the pandemic. And rather than you just doing civil and crime, you'll also do potentially some advocacy as well to help you contextualize your learning. So for example, you might learn bail in crime, and then immediately in advocacy do a bail application. So there's different ways to contextualize it, but I think a lot of it depends on how you want to study. Do you want that support of a face-to-face class or classes in a week, or are you happy to do it online? Essentially without that face-to-face support? And either of those will appeal to different people, and that's absolutely fine, and that's part of the diversity in the program structures that we've now got. If you want to do that online, you can do. If that's for you, that's great. However, if you want to do it differently, the face-to-face option, that's also great. That's available for you as well. So a key thing for you to ask yourself is, how do you want to learn on the bar course? And having answered that question, you then need to consider which of the universities offer you the pathway to learn in that particular way. For my mind, the contextualized learning, where you're basically learning some knowledge and then immediately put that into practice, is essentially how medics learn, how doctors learn, how pharmacists learn, how dentists learn, and that's how our course is set out. So that's how barristers learn as well. You know, we can learn a lot from how medicine is taught. So the ability to have the knowledge, the law, and then use it in practice. The second consideration is the regularity and size of your advocacy groups. So a lot of you on this call, you want to be barristers because you want to be advocates. Of course you do. You want to be in the court. You want to be making those arguments before a judge, before a jury. And what we've seen in the new structures is some have essentially structures where there's no advocacy initially. You're concentrating purely on the knowledge of civil and crime. And then later on, you then start your skills training, including advocacy. So it depends when you want to get on your feet, when you want to be starting to do those submissions, where you want to start learning about being an advocate or indeed being a drafter and things like that. So that's a question you want to ask yourself as well. You know, are you willing to kind of wait to start your advocacy training, or do you want to get on your feet in the first few weeks of the program? So have a think about that. The second there, you know, the first thing, that their size, you know, how many people are in an advocacy class? Are you talking 12 people in an advocacy class? Are you talking less than that? You're talking 5 people in an advocacy class. You know, that's something you need to ask. So it comes back to the kind of course fees and the value for money. You know, you might find that some universities are potentially cheaper, but you might find that a lot of your advocacy classes are in a group of 12. For example. So key thing is, you know, how many people in an advocacy group and how often and when do you want to start that training? Third thing in this particular consideration is specialist practice areas. So on the old BPTC, all of the universities, we had to deliver options. So they were compulsory, but they were options. So you could choose from a range of options, and it depended on the universities to what those options were. Now, in the new world, the BSB no longer requires optional content. Okay, there's a core set of skills and knowledge that a student has to pass in order to be called to the bar and in order to commence pupillage. Now, what you need to think about is whether or not you want any optional content or not. So do you want to do things in a more common law field? Do you want to do things in a more commercial field? Because if you do, then that's something you need to ask your potential bar course university, because some of the universities, they're not offering any optional content at all. Other universities are offering the optional content, but it's either part of a LLM or it's part of a different version of the bar course, apart from the core, and they're charging extra money for that. Okay, and then other providers are offering some optional content, but that optional content is part of the core and there's no additional charge for that. So what you need to think about is, do I want some optional content in my bar course? If I do, does that university offer that optional content? And if they do offer that optional content, is it included in the basic course fees, or will I have to pay extra or take a different qualification to do it? The final thing, the penultimate issue in course design is to think about the flexibility. So as I said before, we had previously a one size fits all. We had starting September, finishing June. That's no longer the case anymore. we have courses now that start at various points of the year: September, January, March. So again, that's a consideration for you. Are you going to be ready to start in September in the traditional academic year stance, or would you like the option of starting at a different point during the year? In which case, does your potential bar course university offer you that? Other things to consider is whether or not you want to split your training into two. Do you want to do part one and part two? Because that's an option, because you can then spread the cost of the course over a period of time, which might enable you to access the bar when perhaps previously, if you had to pay for it all at once, you might be unable to do so. Now, if you are considering a part one, part two, it goes back to considering what is in those part one and part two. Okay, so is it just civil and crime, or is it civil and crime and advocacy, for example, in part one, or something else? The final thing to consider is, what is the wraparound? So what's the educational technology that university is offering? How are they getting you ready for the centralized exams? Are they have they got educational platforms that can give you MCQ preparation, for example? Have they got a platform that has artificial intelligence that can help you aid your studies? We're moving into a much more digital world at the moment. There's a lot of digital educational tools out there that can really help and assist you developing your knowledge and your skills ahead of the exams. So that was it for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions in here. So if anyone else wants to ask questions, please do fire away. We've got about 8 minutes before the end of the presentation. So I'm asked a question: which pro bono activities would you say are the best to look for in bar course providers? It's a good question. I think that there's a number of things that you need to think about. And it basically comes down to what barristers do, really. So fundamentally, you advise clients, or you speak in court, really, as well as doing drafting and opinion writing, i.e., written advice. So you're looking for pro bono activities that can potentially assist you developing those skills. So the one that I help with, we basically advise. Well, we have an interview, then we advise in writing as to the client's legal issues. So you're essentially developing what would be conferencing skills, doing that, and then you're advising in writing. So although it's in a letter, effectively it's developing your opinion writing skills, and indeed your legal research writing skills. And now, a lot of the time, you're not going to be able to go to court or anything like that, obviously, because of rights of audience. But there's things that you can develop your oral skills. So, for example, things like street law are things where you're making presentations, and you're actually advocating for something. So those are important things to think about. So it's whether or not those pro bono activities will align with the skill set that a barrister needs. So in conferencing, interviewing, oral skills of kind of like speaking in public, drafting, legal research, opinion writing. When you say look, sorry, another question here. When you say look at past students have fared getting pupillage, how will the changes alter this? For example, will it take a few years to see the effect of the changes, and how providers fare in the success of their students getting pupillage? Again, a really good question, and a difficult one as well, really, because we're not going to see the statistics for the bar courses come through for another few years yet. So for a few years, we're going to have to rely on the BPTC statistics in order to inform us as to what the future might hold. What I would say is that, there is one new entrant to the market, and there are potentially going to be more. But what I would say is that, it's the same people delivering the programs. And if anything, what has happened is the providers have essentially, as I said, gone back to first principles and decided to change. And, some people have changed more than others. In order, and the reason why we've done this is to make bar training better and essentially better in order to prepare you for practice, prepare you for pupillage. So I'd say you can rely on those statistics. And it will be a few years before the bar course begins to feed into that. We're probably not going to be talking until 2022, 23. But I think you can rely on them as a good indicator of where the new bar course stands. Third question here: does it make a significant difference if we complete the LLM before bar training, or do you recommend prioritizing bar training? Yeah, I'm asked that question a lot. I think I don't genuinely think well, it depends when you want to get into pupillage, really, and if you're attempting a kind of seamless transition into it. If you want to do your LLM and you want to do a academic LLM and then do bar training and then seek pupillage, or essentially seek pupillage, but to join shortly after you finish your bar course, then that's fine. If you do your bar course and then do an LLM, you're delaying pupillage. So that's what you've got to think about. And you've also got to think about the loan situation as well. If you want to use your LLM funding to fund your bar training, then you're only allowed to use it once. So if you've previously done an LLM, you won't be able to access loans funding for a bar course LLM. So I think there's two things you need to think about. I'd probably, if you're thinking about doing a freestanding LLM, do it first and then bar training. Because then you've done your academic side of things, you then onto your professional training, and then you can go into pupillage. But the question is whether or not you want to do an LLM as part of your bar training because you want to access the funding. Another question here: is it discouraged to leave a gap between graduating from your undergrad and starting your BPC? So the BPC is one course, so it's bar training, bar course. I don't think so anymore. It used to be the case when I was, back in the day, 20 years ago, when I was setting out, it tended to be people kind of came through and you did your, your A-levels, degree, bar training, pupillage, qualification, etc. And it's not necessarily the case like that now. There is people are taking gaps in between their undergraduate degree and commencing the bar course. Quite often that is to earn a bit of money in order to fund their further training. Or alternatively, quite often, is to get some legal experience. So they might work as paralegals or legal advisors in law firms in order to get a little bit of experience before then taking the step into the bar course. So I don't think it's discouraged at all anymore. It's part and parcel. I think the average age of a pupil now is past 25. I think it's about 26, 27 now. So yeah, don't worry at all about perhaps taking a year or two, perhaps working in practice just to get a bit more experience, get a bit more funding. That's absolutely fine. So that's the final question. Unless anyone's got any more, although we've almost there at 22. So unless any other questions come through, thank you very much for listening to my presentation and coming to my presentation on this Saturday morning. I wish I could be there in person with you, but such is life at the moment here in Tier 3 in Manchester. I hope all of you stay safe, and I hope you enjoy the day here at this law fair, and I hope you get as much out of it as you possibly can. So stay safe, everyone, and enjoy your day. Bye.